So let's see how we could use a service for data fetching. Because the idea behind services, as you learned in this course, is that you can use them for sharing data and/or logic. And therefore here we can add a places service, and actually you already have one in this project, but it's pretty empty, as you can tell. It got some signal, which we'll use later, and it got a couple of methods here. Now, what I want to do here is I want to add another new method, which is a private method, so that we can't use it from outside this service. And I'll name it fetch places, though the name is up to you. And now we can go to either the available or the user places component, and then there grab this code where we use the HTTP client, or where we start using it, grab all that code, including the pipe method, up to excluding the subscribe method, and cut that code. Of course, that breaks the component, but we'll take care of that later. In the places service, we can then add it here in fetch places. Now, of course, we must make sure that the HTTP client is available here, and thankfully that's straightforward to do because we can also inject services into services, as you learned. So here I'll inject the HTTP client into my places service. I also have to make sure that map and catch error and throw error are available, and therefore we can go to available places and take those RxJS imports, cut them, and bring them over into the places service. Like this. With that, we got this fetch places function, which in the end prepares this GET request and the pipeline for handling the response of that request, including a potential error. And my idea now is that I can use fetch places in both load available places, which I plan to call from inside the available places component, and load user places, which should be called from inside the user places component. To achieve this, fetch places should take the URL as an input, and it should take the error message as an input. And both should be of type string. And then we can replace the hard-coded URL here with the URL we get as a parameter, and replace the error message here. So I'll cut that error message and replace it with the error message parameter. And we should then also return this produced observable so that we can use it in the place where we call fetch places. Because now in load available places, we can simply return this fetch places and pass the URL for the available places to it and pass the error message to it. And here that was actually something went wrong fetching the available places. So now load available places is just a wrapper around fetch places and configures this function. We can now go to the place where we need the available places, so the available places component, and there also get rid of the HTTP client call, and instead use our places service here. So instead of injecting the HTTP client here, I'll inject the places service like this. And of course, you must make sure that you also import the places service. And we can then get rid of the HTTP client import. And we can now use this places service and call load available places. And load available places will yield an observable because it simply returns the result of calling fetch places, which returns this observable, which is created with the get method. So therefore, in the available places component, we now have much leaner code. I still subscribe there. I still set up that observer object here, because whilst we could do that in the service as well, and then we could share the data to the component with help of a signal, whilst we could do that, it's often a good idea to set up the subscription in the component so that you can also clean it up there in case the component gets removed. The service, if you would subscribe there, wouldn't know when the component is removed. And it also simplifies the process of handling different states and updating the UI based on different states, since it's in the component where you want to update the UI typically. That's why it's quite common to set up the subscription in the component, but have all the HTTP request configuration in a service, as we're doing it here now. Now in the available places component TypeScript file, I now also want to outsource this put request, and therefore I'll cut this code as well and go to the places service, and then there I have this add place to user places method, and I'll simply return this code which I just cut so that the put request is configured and sent here. And then actually here we could even change this and just expect to get the place ID here so that we can set this as a value, maybe using the shortcut like this for this put request. Of course, this request didn't have a lot of configuration to it, so we could have kept it in the component, but to have a consistent strategy, I'll put all the HTTP request configuration in this service. And in my components, I'll then simply reach out to that service and trigger the requests from there. In this case, by passing this selected place ID to add place to user places. By the way, something I forgot here before is that we should of course also clean up this subscription here, because this also sets up a subscription, so we should store it and clean it up if the component is destroyed. That is really something you should always try to do. Now we can also go to the user places component, and then there we can also get rid of the HTTP client and instead inject the places service like this. And then here call this places service load user places. Now at the moment, load user places doesn't return an observable though, because I haven't worked on this method yet, and therefore we should do this now. And copy that code from load available places, put it in here, and make sure that the request is sent to user-places, and update the error message. Something went wrong fetching the favorite places, or your favorite places. And with that, the user places component should work again too. So if you now reload this data is fetched and the available places also are fetched. And this all works as before, but now using a service for configuring those HTTP requests. And the components then just take care of updating the UI accordingly. So now we're fetching data for the available and the favorite places, and we can add places to the favorite places. But if I click on a place like Machu Picchu, it doesn't appear down here unless I reload. And that's of course typically not the user experience we want. So what I'd like to do instead is I'd like to make sure that we somehow notify the user places component about the place we added. And there are, of course, different approaches we could use here. One approach, which I'll use, is that I actually want to manage my user places in this places service. And I actually already have a signal for that in here, and also a loaded user places signal, which is the same signal but exposed as a read-only signal. Because now we can actually use this signal and update our loaded places when we load places, but also use it when we add a new place to our user places. And I'll start by setting and updating this user places signal in this service whenever we loaded user places. For this here, in this load user places method, we can call pipe again on the result of calling fetch places. Because fetch places yields an observable, and even though it is an observable where we already called pipe before, we can simply call pipe again. There's nothing wrong with that. So we can call pipe here and pass the tab operator to it. And for that, you must import tab from RxJS. And the tab operator is an operator you can use to execute some code as you would do it in subscribe, but without subscribing. So you can pass such an observer object to tab and define what should happen if that observable emits a new value, emits an error, or something like that. So here I'm interested in the next value being emitted, not in errors, but in the next value being emitted. And I know that this will be my user places in the end. And TypeScript knows that too. It will be an array of places, because that's the kind of data this observable will emit. So I tap into that, and then here I want to set my user places. So now I'm targeting this user places signal here. I want to set that signal here to a new value, and that should be the user places I got from this observable. So now I'm simply using this tab operator to update some data in this service without subscribing here. That's what you could use the tab operator for. Now, why am I doing this here? Well, because by managing my user places here, I can actually go to the user places component and get rid of the next function here in this observer object, and instead only handle the error and complete cases here, and replace this places property here, which currently manages a signal that belongs to this component, replace that with a places property that in the end uses the signal provided by the places service. This loaded user places signal, which is that read-only signal. With that, the data that's showing up in this component is managed in this service, whereas errors and the loading state are still handled by this component. And that is something you could do. Again, it's just one way of handling this, but it's a way. And if you save that and you reload, you should therefore still see your places. You still will not see them instantly when you add new places, but that's now a second step we'll take care of soon. For the moment, it's just good enough that we are able to load the places now with help of the service and with help of this signal in this service, or these two related signals.